There is a laboratory in America at a place called Los Alamos, and lot of research goes on there. Most of the research is kept secret because it is weapon related. And in fact, the first atom bomb was invented there in that laboratory, which was used in Japan. So in 1984, Krishnamurti was invited to give a talk and hold a dialogue in that laboratory. And the topic was given as creativity in science. And Krishnamurti disappointed the whole scientific community by saying that science can never be creative. He said science can at the most be inventive. Science can invent, but cannot create, because it is based on knowledge and it is the product of thought. And thought, if it is a response of memory, then memory is always of the old. Because whatever memory we have, it is always of whatever has already happened. That is what we remember. If a thing hasn't happened, then we don't know of it at all. When it happens, then we know, and so that knowledge is always about what has happened. And what has happened is a past, is the past. And so it is always old. And from that old knowledge, a thought arising, so thought is also anchored into the old. And such old thought, how can it create anything new? It can't be creative. It can invent. Invent means he can modify whatever the past is and present it as something new. And therefore, it can never be creative, but it is only inventive. So, we have to understand these three words. One is the creation, invention, and discovery. So, in discovery, you discover what is already there. The only thing is that you don't know that it is there, or you don't understand it. And therefore, when it becomes known to you, when you start understanding it, then it becomes a discovery. For example, Newton discovered the law of gravity. We don't say Newton invented law of gravity. We don't say Newton created law of gravity, because the law of gravity was already there, it was functioning. It's only that Newton came to know about it, and therefore it's a discovery. But invention is something which was not there before, but now it exists. But then it is the product of thought. It is based on thought. And thought means whatever knowledge is already established, that using that knowledge, this thing has been made. And thought is always mechanical, repetitive, and therefore invention is also mechanical and repetitive. The same principle repeated in a different way, and you call it as a new invention. So the radio waves used in a certain way, you have one invention. So you say this gadget functions this way based on the principles of radio waves. And you can have another gadget which will carry on another kind of function, right? But the same old thing, same principle and only a modification. And that is what the technology is based on. And artificial intelligence is also not creative. It can be inventive. It can help human beings invent many new things, new gadgets, make new machines, new products of entertainment and so on. But it can never be creative. So then the question arises, then what is creation? And what is it to be creative? Now, if you say that creation means something completely new, which didn't exist, and it comes into existence, then invention also, you say that yes, things were not there before and now they exist. Now what difference does it make whether it is thought based or not thought based, whether it is based on knowledge or not based on knowledge? So this difference, I think, is to be properly understood. Creation doesn't require knowledge. Creation happens, and when that creation is to be expressed, then that expression may need knowledge. But it's not necessary that the creation has to always express itself. Only when it wants to express, or only when it is to be expressed, then for that expression the knowledge may be required. But if not to be expressed, then knowledge is not required. But yet the creation has taken place. So this gives a sense that creation is something to do with life, something to do with what is living, while invention is just a inanimate mechanical thing. And therefore we say that the nature is creative, but the thought is inventive. And what nature creates, thought cannot create, because so far the technology hasn't been able to create any living thing, starting from the basic elements, which is the material. And so the creation is something totally different from invention, not related to it. Then what is creativity? We say that certain artist is very creative, certain musician is very creative. Then Krishnaji doesn't accept that, because he says that it is not a particular art or particular action that is creative, it is the mind that is creative. A creative mind then will present the art in a creative way, will present the music in a creative way. And if the mind is creative, then such a creative mind will be creative in all aspects of life. It is not just that the human being is creative in music or creative in art and not at all creative in his day-to-day life. If a person is completely ordinary, mediocre in his day-to-day life and he excels only in his field of art or science, like a scientist, then Krishnaji doesn't call him as creative human being. If he is creative, a mind which is creative will be creative all throughout. Not that creative only in one field or one aspect and not creative at all in other aspects. So in nature, whatever creation that happens, so Krishnaji has always inquired into this question, what is the source of everything that exists? And how one will discover that source? Now, obviously, if the source is beyond the realm of thought, then you cannot seek it in the realm of thought. And if it is not in the realm of thought, then the exploration of that source, the thought may prove to be a hindrance. Because thought can only imagine. Thought can imagine the source based on what is the nature of that source, what properties it should have, so which is knowledge. So based on that knowledge, the thought can imagine what could be the source and then say that yes, that is the source. But that's only an imagination, it's not the source. But to come actually upon that source, to come in contact with that source, the thought has to be silent, or thought has to be in its proper place. If thought is scattered all over, then you cannot explore or discover that source. And also, then creation is not possible. So, in his last talk at Chennai, that was the last public talk of his life, after which he never talked or gave a public talk, because he passed away just about 1.5 months after that talk. So in that talk he said that if your life is disorderly, then find out why it is disorderly and bring order. If you are not thinking straight, then think straight. And do this today, not tomorrow. And unless you have done this, you cannot enter the world of creation. So he has put the world of creation completely outside the realm of thought. And then he says that the origin of life is sacred. There is sanctity about it. It's not something which is to be very casually taken. It's absolutely sacred. And to discover that absolutely sacred, one needs a sacred mind. Only a sacred mind can discover that absolute sacred. Otherwise, it can only imagine what it is. But to touch that absolute sacred, only a sacred mind can do that. And then obviously the question then arises, what is a sacred mind? And how does one have that? Is that mind sacred which regularly does puja, goes to temple, prays, give homage, pray 5 times a day, or pray once on Sunday, or do rituals, or read the religious books? All that is the activity of thought. And Krishnaji says, thought cannot be sacred. Because if thought is sacred, then everything that is created by thought is also sacred. Which means that all the destructive weapons which thought has created are also sacred. All the killings that thought has done, then they are also sacred. Because a sacred thing, whatever it does, will be always sacred. And so, if wars and killing is not sacred, then thought cannot be sacred. But people who wanted to project thought as sacred, they have tried to make these wars and killings as sacred. They have said that they are killing it for the sake of God. God has ordered them to kill. Now, how can God order His own creation to be killed? So, thought is not sacred. And if our life is mostly based on thought, then it is also not sacred. So the artificial intelligence, the robots, all the technology, gadgets, there is nothing sacred about it. It's there, mechanical. It is useful in certain way. It can help, it can also destroy. So if thought is not sacred and the life which is lived completely based on thought alone cannot be sacred, then how does one discover what is sacred? Now, human beings have these 3 aspects of their existence: the body, mind, and the heart. So, mind is with respect to intellect, the heart with respect to sensations, emotions, feelings, and the body, the physical body. And if all this thing is guided by thought, then all of that becomes mechanical. The sensations, feelings, we tend to think that probably they are not mechanical. They arise, they fall. But when they get combined with thought, then they become mechanical. Like say somebody saying something to you, as a result of which a sensation arising in you, right? The sensation itself may not be mechanical, but when it gets associated with thought, then it becomes mechanical. Because whenever that thought is provoked, whenever that thought arises, that sensation will also arise, that feeling will also arise. And so, even psychologically, human beings are living a mechanical life. I mean, if we think that the factor which differentiates human beings from machines is the factor with regard to heart, that is emotions, feelings, sensations, because the machines don't have this. And therefore, that is a factor which can differentiate human beings from a machine. But what the machine says is that, well, we will make that factor also behave in a mechanical way. And therefore, then it will be controlled. Then there is no uniqueness of a human being. So, what you feel, how you react, all your psychological responses, all those things, if they are controllable by machines, then your whole existence is controlled by machines. Then you just become one of them. You are not different from them. Because anybody who knows your responses to given provocations, he can easily manipulate you. He can just create that provocation and make you respond in that way. And when you respond in that way, he will get whatever he wants to get it done from you. So like that, you will become just an instrument in the hands of such external agencies. So, if you don't allow the thought to combine with the emotions, sensations and feelings, then they will arise in response to the surrounding, in response to the environment, and as they arise, they will also subside, and no thought being associated, then they cannot be controlled, then they are not mechanical. So now is the question, are human beings completely mechanical, or there is a non-mechanical aspect, there is non-mechanical potential in human beings? Because if human beings are completely mechanical, then they are no different than the machines, no different than the robots. And therefore, this question becomes important. So, which means that, is there anything else to human beings apart from thought? And how does one find that out? So you have to begin from what you have. Your exploration should begin from where you are. You cannot begin your exploration from some imaginary point because then that exploration will have no meaning. It will be all imaginary only. And if you want to move factually, then you have to begin factually from where you are. And we have to then begin with thought. Because that is what we are. We are living on the basis of thought. We are acting on the basis of thought. And our emotional aspect is also entangled with thought. And we are living on that basis. So we have to understand all the nature and functioning of our life, which is based on thought. And that is where the observation. So through observation, you follow the activities of thought, trying to understand those activities of thought. You use thought itself, because that is your only instrument. So using thought, you are trying to understand the nature of thought, its activities, and so on. Now, thought has to move logically and rationally. And in all the investigation, scientific investigation or inventions, the thought has to be used logically and rationally. It cannot go as per your likes or dislikes. It cannot go as per your opinions and judgments. It has to factually move with facts, and logically and rationally. So, when you want to understand yourself, then thought is the only instrument which you have to use, and then you have to use it logically and rationally. And in that movement, which is logical and rational, you have to use all the resources that are available with that instrument. Make full use of it. All the resources, nothing held back, nothing reserved, which means stretching the thought to its limit. Stretching the thought to its limit means thought cannot move further, thought cannot think further. That's the limit. So when such a limit is reached, either the thought will fall back or just stay there. If it falls back, then you are back to the mechanical, repetitive routine of the thought. But if you are able to stay there, means thought is completely silent. It cannot be active because it has reached its limit, can't go further, but still remains there. So with its full potential, with its full energy, it is there, but with all the silence, all the energy focused there with complete silence, and that is the point of creation. That is the point where a flash of insight will happen or can happen. And whatever that comes through that flash, that is the creation, that is the creativity. Something completely new, it may be a new understanding, it may completely a new thing which is expressed, it could be a poem, It could be a new composition of music, it could be a completely new kind of art, it could be any of that depending upon, because whatever the resources available, with those resources, when that creation expresses itself, then according to the resources, the expression will vary. If the resources are in terms of the words, maybe a beautiful poem may come out of it. If the resources is in terms of the singing ability, the music, the sounds, then he may come out with a beautiful piece of music. And so then that is how the creativity can manifest in our daily life. And we have seen such things happening. I mean, most of the discoveries in science, they are the outcome of such insights. I asked one poet, my wife was a very accomplished poet, and I asked her, how do you write poems? She said she doesn't write poems, she doesn't compose them. The poem comes to her. Something happens within her and takes the form of a poem. And when it takes the form of a poem, she has to immediately write it. If she doesn't write, then it is lost. She doesn't remember afterwards. So, creation is something like that. It comes from something living. It's not a dead, mechanical, repetitive thing. And with insight or perception, if a new understanding is coming, then to express that new understanding in terms of the words, one may have to write volumes. Just one flash of insight brings so much understanding, which if it is expressed in words may need volumes to be written about it. So a creative life is the life of insight, where the insight acts, where the insight works, and thought is merely used if it is required to carry out that action at a physical level. If no action is to be carried out, then thought is not required at all. And yet the insight would be there, the creativity would be there. Now, a mind where thought as the me comes to an end, then such a mind is the sacred mind. Now you will ask where this me is suddenly coming up here in our investigation. Because we have not talked about the self or the me, we were talking about the mechanical nature of thought, the repetitive nature of thought, and where from suddenly this me is coming. So the me is not coming suddenly. The thought, when it enters or tries to function in the psychological field, which means that the thought associating itself or entering the realm of emotions, sensations and feelings, associating itself with those, then that is where the self or the me as a center arises, that is formed. And when that happens, then those emotions, those sensations, they are contaminated. Because Krishnaji has said that the thought contaminates. And therefore, then there is no sanctity about such a mind. A mind which has lot of such psychological content, which is the combination of these feelings, emotions, sensations and the thought, the image, then that mind is already contaminated, so not sacred. So then such a mind cannot discover the sacred origin of life. So if you are able to keep thought in its place, not let it enter this field of emotions, sensations and feelings, then those emotions, sensations, feelings, they have altogether a completely different quality. Then they are not mechanical repetitive. And that quality is the quality of passion, because then there is a lot of energy. And that passion, when it is not directed by thought, then that is the compassion. And Krishnaji says compassion is the beginning of love. And therefore, he says that with love alone the creation is possible. And this will sound quite curious to us, that this whole universe exists because of love, because of compassion. Because somehow we seem to think that love and compassion has something to do with sentimentality, something to do with emotions, something to do with something which is very, very human. Yes. And he says that yes, the whole of existence is because of this love. And then when the mind is not contaminated by thought, such a mind, he says, is the innocent mind. And with this innocent mind, when you explore, when you inquire, then alone you are likely to come upon that which is the origin of everything. So he also talks about the meditation. So only an innocent mind, when it meditates, then there is a possibility of that mind coming upon that origin of everything, and which is sacred. Now, until that happens or comes to our life, it may remain just as a theory. We may say that yes, Krishnaji says it, but it's not part of my life, and so it becomes a theory. And why should I accept a theory? But what we can do is, based on that theory, if we can see the implications of that theory and apply those implications and see whether they function, whether they are valid in our day-to-day life, then the validity of that can in some way at least indicate or imply the validity of what he is saying. So, if we say that the origin of all the existence is most sacred, then the life which has originated from that also is sacred. So, there is a sanctity to life. Life is sacred. Then you cannot say that it's my life and I will just live whatever way I want to live. Then you are ignoring the sanctity of life. And a person who is ignoring the sanctity of life has no possibility of discovering that sacred. So, if life is sacred, then it has to be lived like that. So, how do you respond to a thing which is sacred? When you are told that that idol in the temple is sacred, then what is your response? How do you treat that idol? How do you respond to that idol? You are very humble, right? Then you also are very protective about it, in the sense that nothing should happen to it. You look after it, care for it. You see to it that it is clean, neat, and whatever best you have, you also offer it to that. Now, if you take life as sacred, then all that you do to the idol, you have to do it with respect to your life. So, which means that in all your actions in your day-to-day life, a sanctity must be there. There has to be sanctity to that. So, the way you do things, the way you carry them out, the way you go about them, now does that reflect that sanctity, or you just casually take it and in a very sloppy way or in a hopeless way you deal with it? And so then one has to look at all this, one has to observe and see whether there is any sanctity in the life which one is actually living. What people usually do, they separate sanctity, invest it into some image, something, and only to that extent they will behave in that way, and at all other times they will just behave whatever way they want to behave. So then that means there is no sanctity to their life. The sanctity is only confined to certain things which they consider as sacred. And so if one wants to enter that world of creation, one wants to come upon that origin which is most sacred, one has to see that there is sanctity to one's life, and life not something imaginary, but the actual day-to-day life. So I think now I will invite questions from you on this, or any questions that you have.
Sir, yesterday you discussed about the psychological condition. So it is a man-made psychological condition due to the for millions of years that got not evolved or not developed.
Yes.
Only technologically is going on. So in that process, there is gods in that area. Is there any god involvement, sir, to change that psychological area? Yesterday you told that higher existence are that frequency, not related to that psychological area. Is there any responsibility? God's responsibility is there in that area, sir. What we made psychological condition. Why it is not changing?
No, what we were saying yesterday was that the psychological conditioning is the work of the human beings. They have created it, and if they have created it, they only will have to dismantle it. Whatever is their creation, they only will have to dismantle it. Nobody else will dismantle it for them. And if you say the God will do that, the God will never do that. Yes. God will never decondition you. Now you may ask why. That's an interesting question. So I will here quote one incident told to me by a person who was working in medical college. Nalutai, her name was. So she said that there was a biology class, and in that biology class, the teacher was teaching about the life cycle of a butterfly. And in that life cycle of a butterfly, a stage comes where there is a cocoon. And in that cocoon is the butterfly. And in that protected space of the cocoon, the butterfly is getting formed. And when it is completely formed, it has to break that cocoon and come out. And then it is a fully grown butterfly, and it can fly and all the life. So the teacher, somehow he gets hold of a cocoon which is almost half broken, The butterfly is trying hard to come out of it, and he brings it there in the classroom, and he keeps it on the table before his students and says that, you watch this, don't do anything about it. Just watch till the butterfly comes out and flies. And meanwhile, he said he has some other work to attend, and so he goes. And here the students are watching that butterfly. It is struggling very hard to break that cocoon, to come out, trying very hard. So many times it is unsuccessful to break it, but again and again it is trying. And somehow one student, he takes pity on that butterfly and says that, let me help him. So he breaks the cocoon, and the butterfly comes out, tries to fly here and there, and after a while it is dead. Finished. So when the teacher comes back and he sees the dead butterfly, he asks, did any one of you break that cocoon? Obviously, and he said that that was a wrong action. Because the very struggle was building the strength in that butterfly to live. And by breaking that cocoon, you have deprived that butterfly from building that strength. And therefore, a weak butterfly came out, couldn't fly properly because no strength, and therefore couldn't survive much. Now you tell me, should the God help you to break your conditioning? Yes? Yes. So, will you on your own, right, investigating, observing, I mean, these are just the words when they are spoken, but when you actually do it, so when you dismantle your own conditioning, you are coming out as a stronger human being. You are coming out as a capable, and whatever potential you have, some of it has already grown, already unfolded in your attempt to understand and come out of that. So that's why the God will not help, because to help is wrong. And in nature, the arrangement is such that nothing which will destroy you will be brought to you. That means whatever comes in your life, only that will come which you are capable of overcoming. Nothing will come which will simply crush you and you are not able to come out of it. But if you are lazy, not willing to do the efforts or do the work, then naturally you will be crushed. But if you are willing to do your part, then you will come out stronger and abler from that situation. Yes, sir? Yeah.
You said to enter into silence.
To enter into silence.
Yes. This is what I have understood, sir.
Yeah.
You said to enter into silence, heart has to be stretched.
Heart has to be stretched to its limit. That's right.
Heart has to be stretched to
Yes.
its maximum limit,
Yes.
using
Yes.
logic and rationality
Yes.
and all its resources.
Yes.
So Now, if you permit, I will give one example, sir. Kindly help me how I can stretch this in this example.
Yes.
Today, I promised my wife, who are coming here, that I will reach home by 7:30 with food parcel from hotel to five members in the house. Not realizing that I would spend my time here because there is a force in me now to spend more time here. There is a sharing in my body now, frankly speaking. Now, how I have to stretch my thought now to reach to silence so that the fear goes, sir. Thank you.
A good question you have asked. You see, if it is merely a transfer of information, is the thought stretched? If thought is acting merely as a transfer of information, if it is merely acting as the transfer of information, then there is no stretching. Like a teacher teaching in the class, right? And he is giving knowledge and information to the children. So what he is doing in essence, he is transferring the data from his brain to the student's brain. And then the student has to use that data, and there will be some questions, and he has to answer those questions on the basis of that data. If he is able to answer, then he has learnt or he is educated. That even a machine can do. So, there is no understanding there. It's only when you try to understand something, your brain is utilized. Your brain is functioning. If you are merely transmitting data, if you are merely experiencing sensations, then the brain is not working. It is just being just passive, not using its resources. And therefore, there won't be any quietude. There is no question of stretching thought there. When we say that, can you stretch your thought? What we are actually meaning is that, can you stretch your intellectual capability to its limit? Because thought is the product of that intellect. Intellect is your potential, intellect is your strength, and that intellect functions through the medium of thought. It is the intellect which will guide the thought, it is the intellect which will decide which thought should be there, which should not be there, or how to combine, how to associate, how to get all those things. So, the operation of the intellect. Now, can you stretch that intellect to its limit? Means you have some problem with you, you are trying to solve that problem, nobody else has solved that problem before, and in solving that problem you are using your intellect. Now, you are using all the resources of your intellect. In all possible ways you are thinking, whether it is this way or that way, or whether it could be this, and if it is this, what are the implications. So, in all possible ways you are using that intellect, and yet you are not getting the solution of that problem, or not able to understand that thing. So, finally what happens is that when the intellect is stretched to its limit, it is unable to function, it can't go further. And therefore, when it doesn't function, then the mind is quiet. No thought is arising. And that is the real silence.
I exhaust all my manipulative skills.
Pardon, sir?
I exhaust all my manipulative skills.
Yes, exactly.
That's right.
So, for this, I think either the person has to, like, how can we just relate it, maybe he's reading something, if he wants to understand a particular thing, very difficult problem.
Yes.
For that, if he's stretching his imagination and using his resources,
Yes.
because that means unless and until there is a trigger, maybe outward challenge or maybe something new and different kind of information he's faced with. In order to understand that, then he has to stretch his limits of thought. Unless there is a trigger, there is a challenge, this can't be tested.
Yeah, but there are enough challenges in our life. So many things are happening in our life, and we have plenty of challenges. And we have to respond to those challenges. But do we respond with our resources of the brain, or we are merely seeking an easy solution, which is ready-made, which is prescribed? And if you do that, then you are not using the resources of your brain. Then the brain will not develop.
First, I take the example of my academics. I take a problem, I know all possible methods, ways I exist. Somehow still I have the feeling that something can be done. That's a disaster. Still working. That course is still working. Maybe probing that aspect of it has to come to standstill. Then what it is?
Yes.
We come to a point that we're working on.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paresh, go ahead.
Sir, if life is sacred and human life is sacred, then how is that we have created something unsacred, like thought?
Yeah, it's a good question. You say the origin is sacred, so whatever has originated from it, all that has to be sacred. Then how come the thought is not sacred? Whether the thought has originated, if thought also has originated from there, right? Now actually, if the thought runs straight in a logical and rational way, right, then it is the right kind of thought. Then that may be able to express what is sacred. But if thought is not running straight, but running in a crooked way, then it will not be able to express what is sacred. And if it tries to express what is sacred, that sacred will get contaminated. And therefore it will no longer be sacred. You see, the example is, say there is a mechanism which makes the water dirty. And if the clean water has to pass through that mechanism, that clean water will become dirty. And so you can never get clean water through that mechanism. So that mechanism has to end first. Only then you will get the clean water. And therefore, if you say that, well, my Guru or God should grace me with his blessings, and you hold your pot or whatever it is before him, and that pot has, say, a dirty water, and you are asking the God to pour his pure water into that pot which contains a dirty water. And the God says to you, first throw out that dirty water, clean the pot, then you can get this pure water. And you say, I don't know how to clean. I can't throw this dirty water out. Then the God says, sorry, then I can't pour the clean water in that. So this is the situation of human beings. They say that you are conditioned, your thought doesn't function straight, it contaminates. Then first make your thought function straight. Through understanding, come out of your conditioning. Then whatever is sacred can come to you. And without that, if it comes, then it is no longer sacred, it is already contaminated. Yes, sir? Oh, yeah, madam, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ask you one question. Why deity is named as Alcyone?
Oh, yes. She is asking why Krishnamurti was named as Alcyone. Alcyone. The question is why Krishnamurti was referred to as Alcyone. Why he was named as Alcyone. Now, many of you may not know that Krishnamurti was named as Alcyone and in which context he was named as Alcyone. Question doesn't relate to what we are discussing, but since it is asked, we may as well respond to it. You see, the first book which was written by Krishnamurti was At the Feet of the Master. And in At the Feet of the Master, the name of the author is mentioned as Alcyone. And in fact, many of the Krishnamurti students or people, they don't accept that At the Feet of the Master is written by Krishnamurti. They say that it's written by CWL or somebody else. That's what they say. But certainly it is written by Krishnamurti, because there is another book which is Education as Service. And Education as Service is the educational philosophy based on At the Feet of the Master. So if you accept the teachings of At the Feet of the Master as the way of life, then in that way of life, what will be the educational process? How will you educate the children as per that way of life? So that is given in that book, Education as Service. Now the Education as Service, the manuscript in the handwriting of Krishnamurti is available. So from that one can say that most probably the At the Feet of the Master is also written by him. Otherwise, why should he write the Education as Service?
Did he claim that he wrote it?
Pardon?
Did he claim that he wrote it?
He didn't say. because he said that he has no first-hand memory of that period of his life. That memory somehow in some mysterious way was wiped out. So what he knew about that period of his life was what was told to him by others who were witness to what happened during that period of time. And on that basis only he could talk. So it was only a second hand information, not the first hand. First hand he couldn't confirm anything. But then if we look at the evidence, if that book is, the manuscript is available in his handwriting, so that means he has written it. And in that case, at the feet of the master, is also likely that he has written it. But still, we need not accept the authorship of that book as the authorship of Krishnamurti. That is the most interesting point of that book, because in the book itself, the author Alcyone says that these are not my words, these are the words of the master who taught me. So then the authorship goes to the master and not to Alcyone or not to Krishnamurti. So the authorship of that book then is of the master. So in a way, one can say that yes, that book was not written by Krishnamurti. Because that was the teaching which his master gave him or taught him. And so the actual authorship of that book is of the master. Another interesting point is that Krishnamurti doesn't take the authorship of his teaching also. He says that this is not my teachings. I am not the author. I am just the communicator, like a telephone. Just as telephone communicates from one point to another point, so he says, I am just a communicator, I am just like a telephone. But he doesn't explain or talk about who is talking from the other side of the telephone. That he doesn't talk about. This side we know, this side we are there, but who is on the other side, that he doesn't talk about. And so, whether Krishnamurti wrote that book at the feet of the master or not, that question then becomes insignificant, because he is not even taking the authorship of his whole of his teaching. He says that the teaching is not the product of his brain. Teaching is not the result of the process he had to go through. Teaching is not his invention. Then where from has it come? He doesn't explain that.
But he discussed about the ground, source, other side of the source. He says that words master. From that place, his teaching.
Yeah, he doesn't talk about that. But then some people point out that, but in Theosophy it is explained as the world teacher giving that teaching. Now, what is Krishnamurti's response to that? He says that that explanation is very, very concrete, very, very gross, and doesn't actually represent exactly what is happening. So that's all he says. He doesn't say that it is false or it is not true. He doesn't say that. He only says that it is inadequate, it doesn't explain properly what is actually happening, and he leaves it at that. And he all the time said to the people around him that he cannot talk about it, he cannot investigate it. But if you investigate and you find out, then whatever you have found out, he can corroborate it. That means he can say whether what you have found out is correct or incorrect. That much he can do. But nobody during his lifetime was able to find out in any way what this mystery was. And therefore, naturally, he couldn't corroborate. So, those are the things as they are. Yeah.
So if I may ask a question about aspect you touched upon yesterday.
Yeah.
You mentioned about how we should not label the sensation or the feeling.
Yes.
I just wanted to understand if that has any impact on, or does it have any correlation with the need to be involved in whatever we are doing. So if we don't label it or feel it in that sense, how do we reconcile that with the need to be involved in our day-to-day activities or any interactions?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. This question is regarding what we were talking about yesterday, that the psychological reaction arising in us, how to face that so that we do not record psychologically. And we have said that there are two components to this. One is the thought component, other is the sensation component. And when these two mix up, that is what creates the psychological memory or the self. And if you are able to keep them separate, then the self is not there, the observer isn't formed, and therefore it remains only as a sensation. And when it remains only as a sensation, so as it has arisen, so it subsides and nothing is psychologically recorded. That is what we were saying yesterday. And we said that one of the main difficulties in keeping the sensation as sensation is the labeling. Because the moment sensation arises in us, we immediately label it with our thought. Labeling means the interference of thought. So the moment you label the sensation as anger, right, then you have already created the observer who says this is anger, and then he says further reactions, I should not be angry, or I should control it, or I should not say this thing, or I should go away, whatever it is, I mean the further thinking that comes out of it. So when that happens, that sensation gets the continuity, then it doesn't end, but it continues. And along with the thought, it gets recorded in the brain. So by not labeling the sensation, then sensation is sensation. It will stay as long as it has the energy, and it will subside, and when it subsides, nothing is recorded in your brain as the sensation or as the emotion, and then you are free. This is essential because otherwise we are creating a lot of psychological burden in our brain and carrying it with us all the time. Because you see how much memory you have, the psychological memory of all the things that you have gone through, all the suffering you have experienced, all the hurts, all the disappointments, despairs, all the fears. And if you consider all of that, it's a tremendous psychological burden. And you are carrying it with you all the time. Change of place doesn't matter. Wherever you go, you will carry it with you. And they say that you carry it even beyond the grave. Because even when the body is dead, the content continues, the psychological content continues. And so even death cannot relieve you from that psychological burden. And why are you carrying it with you? I mean, what is the need? So far we have been accepting it as inevitable. We have been saying that, well, that is how it happens. We cannot do anything about it, and we have to just put up with it. But then you are making your life unhappy. You are unnecessarily suffering. And Krishnaji says that as long as you suffer, there cannot be love in your life. Therefore, you cannot have the touch of that sacred in your life. And tradition has said that every man has to suffer. And Krishnamurti says that it's not necessary to suffer. You are suffering out of your ignorance. You don't want to do the work which is required to be done in order to end that suffering. And that is why it is necessary that you have to learn, you have to understand what exactly is happening when the psychological memory is created. So the beginning of that psychological memory is the labeling of the sensation, labeling of the feeling. The moment you label, it is identified, goes into your memory as that label. So we have so many different feelings and sensations stored in our memory, properly labeled that this is fear, this is anger, and all those things. Now, has that labeling helped you in any way to end your suffering or to come out of it or to be free of it? It hasn't. And so, why do that? Why is it necessary for you to remember those sensations? And sensations will keep on happening. That is our nature. That is part of our existence. So they will keep on happening. But when you want a particular kind of sensation to continue and repeatedly experience it because you call it as pleasure, then you are trapped in it. And the same mechanism which records the sensations which you categorize as pleasure also records the sensations which you categorize as pain. So if you accept pleasure, you have to accept pain also. Same mechanism. But you want to have pleasure but not to have pain. It is like you want to have one side of the coin but don't want to have other side of the coin. But when you have the coin, you have both the sides. You can't avoid it. And that is why it is important to understand why do we keep on recording these sensations. And the recording happens because we happen to label it. And so why label it? I mean, what benefit you are going to derive by calling that sensation as anger or fear or this or that? I mean, what is it that you are gaining out of that label? So if you don't label it, it will subside.
So the labeling happens so automatically. So automatically it happens. So when it happens and when I realize that I am labeling it, with awareness can I just manipulate it?
Yes. Yeah.
Now here is a problem that labeling happens automatically. Before you realize, you have already labeled that sensation. right? So then can you watch that labeling process itself as it is happening? Or after labeling, whatever is there, can you watch that? Because it won't stop just at that. Once you label it, then all the associated memory with that label will also respond, will also come out. And then you have to watch that. So the watching has to be there. Watching has to continue. Yes.
All this happens in a real situation where the action also requires.
Yes.
So,
That's it.
so again, having that sensation and watching and
So you are saying that while you are doing all this and you need to act in that situation, right? So do you act as per that reaction, or when you are watchful of the reaction, you are watchful of what is happening, then still you can act without being influenced by that reaction. Right? If you are not aware of your anger at all, you will act out of that anger. But if you are aware of your anger, right, then at least you will be able to stop that reaction from influencing your action. A person is in an angry state. In that angry state, the anger is urging him to say something. And if a person is not aware of his anger, then he will end up in saying that. But when he is aware, right, at least he will say that, well, this is coming out of anger. Should I say this? There will be hesitation. The moment there is hesitation, you have the space to take the decision whether to say it or not to say it. So there is a possibility of you not saying it, and therefore the further thing gets avoided.
Krishnamurti said explicitly that there is no need for suffering.
No need for suffering.
Explicitly,
He has explicitly said that where there is suffering, there cannot be love. And if you say that suffering is inevitable, every human being has to suffer, that means then there is no love in human life at all. And he talks about the ending of suffering. Yes, Silva?
you narrated the butterfly story.
Yeah.
And the butterfly struggles to come out of its shell.
Yes.
Is it that tradition which is saying suffering under suffering, or it is a struggle which is natural potential to come out of it? Whether that is wrongly mean for suffering or
Yeah, so you are in a way asking that whether the struggle which that butterfly is making to come out of the cocoon, is that the suffering of the butterfly? And therefore, if that is suffering of the butterfly, then that means suffering seems to be essential or necessary, without which then you cannot build the strength. Right? Now, butterfly doesn't have a sense of suffering. When the butterfly is struggling, it doesn't say that, oh, I have to suffer so much. Why didn't the God make it easier for me? It's the human beings who say that I am suffering. And which means it is the thought which says that I am suffering. And therefore, that struggle, you see, the nature of thought is such that anything which it has to do, which he doesn't want to do, then that appears as a suffering for him. My job is very boring, I don't want to do it. But I am forced to do it because I have no other way of livelihood. And I continue with that job, but then I suffer. Because I am not at all happy in doing that job. But I have no alternative. I have to suffer and accept. So when the thought has to do a thing which it doesn't like, then he has that sense of suffering. But in nature, one has to learn to survive. There is no option. And if one has to learn to survive, then whatever is required for learning, that has to be done, that has to be. And if that action, if thought doesn't like, then naturally it will suffer. So a sluggish thought, when is required to act, it will come like a suffering to him.
God doesn't want to stretch his limit.
Yes.
So it says he doesn't want to suffer.
Yes.
Stretch my limit.
Yes. Yes.
So I don't want to stretch. As well as if I want to encourage something, I don't want to demand the energy.
Yeah.
But if I want to achieve something, I'll demand that energy will come.
Yeah.
But to stretch the thought or to encourage something, the energy won't come. It's not.
Yeah, no, see, whatever thought wants to achieve, where will it get the energy to achieve that? Right? You may say he will get it from desire. He desires something very intensely, and the energy of desire makes him act in the direction of achieving the object of his desire. Right? But the energy of desire is a divisive energy. And divisive energy will definitely result in a conflict. And conflict will bring suffering, because conflict means something which is not acceptable to you is coming to you, and therefore you suffer. So if that is the way, if thought wants to function, then the suffering will become inevitable for such a person. Then he will say that yes, suffering is the part of life and nothing can be done about it. But if he wants to question that, explore the possibility of whether there is a life without suffering, and he puts his energy, resources, everything in that, and he really ends his suffering, then he gets the unexpected benefit, which is then the love comes into his life, which he didn't expect at all. He was only interested in understanding and ending the suffering. But when he has ended suffering, then there is a possibility of love coming to his life. And with love, then of course the other things.
Only individual suffering should end, sir, or collective suffering also available as collective. So we have to attract love when individually.
Yeah. First, the individual suffering has to come to an end. Obviously, there is no second opinion about it. Every individual has to end his suffering. Now, when he ends that suffering, then he starts becoming aware of the suffering of the other human beings, other living beings. And when he becomes aware of the suffering of other human beings, right, then that motivates him or that activates him to do something about it. Because there is this sense that the other is not different from you. He is part of you. And therefore, by doing something to end that suffering also, you are actually ending your suffering. You see, the mystery is like this. I mean, there is a mystery in this. At the physical level, we have separate physical identifiable bodies and all these things, and through those bodies, the consciousness expressing, and therefore we think that each consciousness is a separate unit, and therefore whatever you have to do with respect to that unit of consciousness. But at certain higher level, the difference is not watertight, in the sense that there is a constant give and take between the various units of consciousness. And if that is the case, then if a person you are staying with you is unhappy, then you cannot be happy. You are living in a family, one of the members of the family is unhappy, then because of that the whole family is unhappy. Then you say that, you can't say that it's not my suffering. Then the suffering of that member of the family becomes your suffering also, and therefore you have to do something to end it. Now this is at the family level, but there is a level of existence where the whole of humanity is you, not different from you. And in that case, any human being suffering means you are suffering. And therefore you have to do something to end that suffering. And that, they say, is the dimension of the consciousness of the world teacher. So at that level, there is this realization, or there is this sense that the totality of humanity is one. It's not separate. But coming down to lower dimensions or lower levels, then it appears as separate. These 5 fingers, they appear as separate, but if you move up, it's all the part of the one and the same thing. If one finger is injured, the whole hand pains, not just that finger.
Sir, that one is called unity consciousness, sir. Yeah, whole.
Yeah, the whole, the unity of consciousness, and that's why they say that the Bodhisattva, the world teacher, will not consider him as liberated until the suffering of the last human being has ended. Till then, he will keep on working at it. I mean, in our language, we call it as work, but in his language, at his level, it is called as compassion. It's the compassion.
But sir, the crisis, when the crisis happens in the relationship, or regarding to unity of consciousness, whenever we try to solve a problem, whenever have to work on that, again it creates further problems.
because our approach is fragmentary. We are considering problem only in a very restricted way. We don't consider it in a holistic way. And therefore, when we consider the problem in a restricted way, solving one problem creates another problem.
But at that moment, we didn't realize that was an intention, and the intentions regret. How can we able to relax at that moment? We do regarding of that. We think, oh, it is going to solve that, but it creates another consequence, another loop start. Due to solution, it is happening problem. Whenever I am trying a solution, I think, oh, it is going to solution of the problem, but it creates another complicated mind.
You see, if it is a physical problem, it can be certainly solved. We have the technology and all this means. But when it is a psychological problem, right? So the approach is different. Psychological problem is not a problem to be solved. It's a problem to be resolved. Now you cannot resolve the psychological problem, but you can respond in such a way which will help the psychological problem resolve. Now what is that response? So that's where Krishnaji says that remain with the problem. Don't try to solve it, don't try to understand it, don't try to do anything about it, just remain with it. And if you are able to remain with the problem, then the problem is resolved, then there is no problem. Finish. This is what he says about the psychological problem. Any psychological reaction, anger or fear, say fear, let us take fear because we have talked so much about anger. So fear, if you try to resolve it, you will never be able to resolve it. You may end one kind of fear, another kind of fear will arise. You may say that I am no longer afraid of this, but then you may say I am afraid of that now. So the fear will keep on coming into your life. And that means the problem of fear hasn't been resolved at all. So what is the approach? Approach is that whenever the fear arises, can you remain with that sensation, with that feeling of fear? Now if you can remain with that without doing anything about it, then the sensation or the feeling of fear, as it has arisen, it subsides. There is no thought to give it continuity because you are just remaining. There is no interference. There is nothing which you want to do about it. Just remain with it. So as it has arisen, it subsides. When it has subsided, finished. When fear subsides, where is the problem? The fear was the problem, but now it's no longer there, so there is no problem. Then you can go for the causes of behind it and whatever it might have done and all those things, and those then you can resolve at the intellectual level. Because we have said that you can solve a problem at intellectual level. You cannot solve a problem at psychological level. A psychological problem is not to be solved, but it gets resolved when you remain with it. But an intellectual or physical problem, you have to solve on the basis of whatever knowledge, information you have. And if you don't have that knowledge, you have to acquire that knowledge. You can acquire it through various references, or you can acquire it through experimentation. So that is one aspect.
We need to say that it's either physical or intellectual things one can help.
Yes.
the rest of the things in the psychological level or something different. Nobody, other person can help. He has to be the
Because you see, at the level of physical, somebody has invented bulb. You can use it without inventing. Every time you want to use the bulb, you don't have to invent it. But somebody is hungry, you are also hungry, he eats food, but your hunger is not satisfied. If you are hungry, you have to eat the food. Somebody else eating food will not satisfy your hunger. So, a psychological reaction which is arising in you, you have to resolve it. The other person cannot resolve it.
But in day-to-day life, many activities are related with psychological.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And therefore, the person himself has to resolve it. Because in that resolution, you see, his potential of observing, his potential of paying attention is unfolding. So, you are not observing just to end that psychological reaction, but as you observe, your potential to observe is unfolding, getting unfolded. So, it is like Krishnaji says that in the very exploration of what is meditation, when you try to explore to understand what is meditation, then that exploration itself, you have already started meditating. So then you don't have to find separately what is meditation. You are already in that state. So when you are watching this play of all these psychological reactions and able to remain with that, then in that your potential to watch, your potential to observe, your potential to pay attention is also strengthening, is also unfolding. If you are able to watch one psychological reaction to its end, then you have already the capability to watch any psychological reaction to its end. And then this watching gets enriched. Then many things which you were missing before, they start showing themselves up. You are able to see them. And the scope of your watching is then, you can say, expands. And then you can not only watch only your own reactions, but you can also watch the reactions of other human beings. A person coming in contact with you, you can immediately feel what kind of psychological content he is carrying with him. Not that you want to know it, but that sense comes.
Teacher, you were mentioning about the mechanism which makes the water dirty.
Yeah.
You just given another term. And then there is this ending of Gom and Krishna was discussing about the human being somewhere they took a wrong turn.
Yeah.
So is there any relation between these two statements?
Yeah, I think the wrong turn probably it's when the thought entered the psychological field, that was probably the wrong turn. Or they say that when a human being killed another human being, probably that was the wrong turn. But much before that, the thought has entered the psychological realm, because only after that the human beings came to that level of killing another human being. So probably that is the wrong turn. But was there a possibility of right turn? Because this makes the question more interesting. Because if there was a possibility of right turn, then why did the human beings take wrong turn? Then that question also arises. You see, that is the nature of freedom. We have not talked about freedom at all, but actually the freedom is very much related with creation or creativity, because creation can happen only in freedom. If you leave the child free, then the child can become creative. But all the time you are telling the child what to do, what not to do, then this child will never be creative. There was an experiment they did with monkeys, but I think that will just prolong our conversation. There are so many experiments. But the point which I am trying to make is, the creation can happen only in freedom, and freedom is absolutely necessary for existence. And therefore, the whole existence is in freedom. And so, if there is a human being, the human being is completely free to use all his resources in any way he likes. See the beauty of the nature, how the nature works. It gives you complete freedom. Do what you will. Total freedom, no restriction, nothing, no control. Right? But then it introduces a clause there. The condition is that whatever you do will have consequences. And those consequences are inescapable. You cannot escape them. You will have to bear those consequences. Right? And so it leaves you free. So you have a thinking capacity. You can use your thought any way you like. You can use it at the physical world, you can use it in the psychological realm, you can use it in any realm. The nature is not bothered about that, it has given you complete freedom. But there is a consequence. So if thought starts working or functioning or interfering in the psychological realm, then there is a consequence. Then a self gets formed. Then there is psychological division, and all the things that we are going through is what happens. But if thought doesn't enter the psychological realm, then maybe something totally different happens. They say that there are evolutions of beings in which there is no sense of self. And those beings, they have never known what suffering is. Life for them is ecstasy. Life for them is joy. So that possibility also exists. But nature cannot dictate what possibility you have to take.
It doesn't.
Pardon?
It doesn't dictate.
Yeah. It doesn't
Dictate.
Yeah, it doesn't dictate, that's right.
So, the karma.
It doesn't dictate. It's up to the human being, total freedom. And because of that total freedom, there is also a freedom to make mistake. There is also a freedom to correct that mistake. There is also a freedom to learn. And through all this, an awakening happens in a human being. And as he is awakened, then he understands this whole thing, and then he is able to cooperate with all this in an intelligent way.
One question here. You said in psychological field, prior to the thought.
Yes.
What do you call that prior to the thought? Psychological field means consciousness. There is unnameable, or there is no name.
Yeah, no, what we are saying is this, that there is a realm of sensations, emotions and feelings, right? When the thought interferes with that, then that is what creates the psychological content. Right? Like say, Krishnaji says that if thought combines with sensation, right, then the desire is born. And then that desire has its own consequences. That means, when you pursue your desire, what happens in one's life and so on. But if the thought doesn't interfere, then sensation remains as sensation. Then there is no psychological content form.
Sometimes terminology consciousness and awareness is used. So what is that?
I didn't understand the question.
Terminology consciousness and awareness is used for the self.
So terminology of awareness and consciousness is used. So you are asking what is the difference between awareness and consciousness?
Yeah.
The difference between awareness and consciousness.
All these are part of that, or different. Consciousness, awareness, and the
Yeah, consciousness and awareness, they are different. As Krishnaji defines it, he says that the consciousness is the content of consciousness. That means consciousness needs the content. Without the content, there is no consciousness. But awareness doesn't need content. There is no content needed for the awareness. There can be awareness without any content. So that is the difference.
Actually, why is so much of this creation in between the small bug, the start of creation? The start is a small bug with all this creation. But is there any reason for it, or it just accidentally arrived to start? Before human beings take the round, you said no, that there is some set of people there with like a blessed joy or suddenly why this bug?
No, thought is not a bug. Please don't consider thought as a bug. Thought is a faculty which is necessary. It's a necessary part of our existence. You see, these things at the lower level, they may appear as emotion, thought, body and all those things. But at much higher and subtler levels, they may be completely different. Like say, instead of thought, it may be intelligence. Instead of emotion, it is love. And then there is the intent to exist. So then they are totally different. So
we have one more doubt. This intelligence sometimes confused, even thought acts as a intellect, sometimes a thought. What is the exact definition by Krishnamurti about intelligence?
he says intelligence has nothing to do with thought. Intelligence is not thought. Intelligence is something totally different. And he says that the intelligence goes with love. Love has the intelligence. But the intelligence of thought is limited. So that is how he differentiates between the intelligence of thought and the intelligence of law. The intelligence of thought we call as intellect. Yeah.
What is your advice to the young generations?
What is the advice?
To the young generations for this busy lifestyle of the people running or making money, and then at the age of 50, they become at the stage. Even though the money is there, but something desperateness.
Oh, I see. The people going after money.
After money, but they have, but still something is missing in them.
Yes, of course.
So how to satisfy and keep a peaceful life?
Yes, that's right. See, if a person thinks that money can buy him all the happiness, and he goes after earning more and more and more money, right? And he finds that in that process, he is becoming more and more unhappy rather than happy. Because if he is earning more money, he should become more happy. But he becomes more unhappy, not happy. Because he says, I want to have more. I want to even earn more than this. This is not enough. And so, going after money is not bringing him happiness, but it is making him unhappy. But that he is unable to see. Somehow he has made up his mind that he has to earn a lot of money in order to be happy. And actually he is being unhappy. So he has to take a reasonable stand about this. He should not define his happiness in terms of money, but he should find out what happiness to him on the basis of what is the quality of his life, what kind of life he would like to live, which means that what he would like to do in his life and which will make him happy. If he is able to find that out, that yes, this is what I want to do in my life, this is what will make me happy, right? Then he can bring in the question of money, that to live this kind of life, how much money I may require. And then if he decides, okay, I need so much money, so I will work to earn this money, then money is not a problem. Then he has put money in its right place and not given it undue importance. Because you see, there is what is called as balance, a proportion. And if the life is lived in right proportion, then it is a beautiful life. Then there is beauty in that. But if the proportion is lost, then there is only ugliness. Then life is no longer beautiful. It's like our whole body, if all the organs, everything is in right proportion, right? Then the body looks beautiful, looks handsome. But if that proportion is not there, say somebody has such a long nose, right? Then he doesn't look, I mean, it looks very odd. Or somebody has some other kind of disproportion, then we say, oh, it doesn't look beautiful at all. See, the proportion brings the sense of beauty. And the life will be beautiful if everything in the life has its right proportion. So, everything has a place. Money has a place, all the activity has a place, everything that you do has a place. And if everything is given its right place, then that means it is all in right proportion. Then there is beauty in the life. Then life is the joy, not a pain to be endured, but it's a joy to be experienced. But somehow our proportion is dictated by the thinker, the thought. which is then according to his likes and dislikes. And when the proportion is decided according to likes and dislikes, then it is no longer a proportion, it is disproportion. Because you see, a simple example, the food has a right place in life. It is required for survival. But when the thought decides that proportion as per its likes and dislikes, you end up in overeating. You end up in eating things which actually are harmful to the body. But thought decides because it decides according to his likes and dislikes. And so whatever it likes, he will go as per that and not what is actually required for the body.
Yes. My question is that about labeling. Somebody spoke about. While meditating, thoughts will come and sensations will come. And the labeling dissolves or it sends to the storage of the memory.
Yeah, labeling of the sensation results in the psychological memory. It gets recorded. When you label a sensation, it creates the psychological memory because it gets recorded in the brain. Yes.
It will come again.
Pardon?
If it is recorded in the memory, will it come back again?
Yeah, the sensation also comes back with the memory. Because you see, whenever you recall a psychological memory, the sensation also gets recalled. And therefore, you then suffer or you re-experience that sensation.
Sir, if you don't mind, I have an experience. I have been practicing about Vipashyana meditation, Mahasi, Sayadaw, Buddhist meditation.
You are not audible, sir. I am not able to hear what.
In Buddhist Vipashyana meditation, that Mahasi Sayadaw from Burma, there is a tradition.
In
Vipassana meditation.
Vipassana meditation.
And in which that when we are actually meditating, these sensations will come and the feelings will also come.
Yes.
And thoughts will also come.
Yes.
My teacher told me that you should label it.
Should be?
You have to label it. What is the same?
Label the thought.
Label the thought.
To allow it to go.
Yeah. Label the thought. Label the thought. Yeah, that reverse what you are actually telling. Label the thought, it disappears. But I have been doing since a very long time, like 2016 onwards. When we label it, it's disappearing.
Does it disappear?
Disappearing. Yeah.
That's good.
Then you have nothing to worry. I mean, and if labeling is happening automatically, then you are automatically the thought arises and also disappears. Then you have to do nothing.
No, I thought of asking this question because of the teacher.
No, that teacher has told you something, right? Now, you say that you have done what the teacher has told you. You have done according to that. And you find that what he said happens. The teacher asked you that if you label the thought, then thought disappears. If you label the sensation, sensation disappears, right? And you say that you have done that. When a sensation has arisen, you labeled it and you found that it has disappeared. So then there is no problem at all. Then you label and it disappears, fine. Then what is the problem?
Actually, sir, I did also, because of my experience I will tell. Actually, what says this, after 3 days, after 7 days, they observe the sensation in the body. Two types of sensation they describe. One is pleasure, one is pain. At that moment, they are only label. That's it, sir, nothing. Again, we should do the work. Observation in a witness state. That one, sir, actually. It's not, I think, it's not labeling also, that one. Just they are indicating whenever sensation, good sensation or bad sensation, pain sensation. That good, if it is good sensation is there, the body feels very happy, feel good. Some pain sensation comes, it rejects. At that moment only, they here and there division created, sir. That one. Just it's not labeling, sir, actually. It's not labeling.
Sir, I have a continuation question.
Sir,
Suppose you have a sensation, sir, and after the sensation, now this topic, there is an amount of time you are quiet. Suppose I got anger and I understand the consequences from the knowledge that if I respond to that anger, then there will be conflict, and 1 or 2 hours I will be not in a good state and I will be in an anger state, and loss of energy is lost. That is the knowledge that I have. Now, sir, with labeling, which has been coming from very long time, that anger is this, anger is that, or fear is this. Now I feel, sir, we are measuring it with time. One instance has happened that that in which I got angry, and it has subsided in 1 hour, and another situation came and I was angry for days. Now with labeling, I am measuring it with time, that I am actually keeping myself calm for that particular period of time, and I feel okay, I have observed it, and later any other situation arises and I am actually, my memory is taking me to keep quiet for 1 hour, and if I do not keep calm, then it's still the memory is actually taking me back and the anger continues still. So this knowledge of does it convert into knowledge, sir? Whatever I feel the observation is not happening there properly, or it is always measuring with time, and does the delabeling happen, unlabeling happen that we already have?
You see, the thought labels the reaction because only after labeling it can do something about it. So when thought wants to do something about it, it has to first label, it has to first recognize it. And after recognition, then it will know what it has to do. For example, if it labels the reaction as anger, then he knows what he needs to do when he is angry. If the reaction is labeled as jealousy, then he knows what he is supposed to do whenever jealousy arises, or fear. So he has different course of actions for different psychological reactions. And if it wants to act, it must know what kind of psychological reaction that is. And for that, it has to recognize it and label it. And that is what goes on, right? But that will only enable him to manage the psychological reactions. And that managing will be also within certain limits, because there may be situations where the psychological reaction is so strong, all his methods of managing it will be of no help, and then he is in trouble. So what we are saying is that if the psychological reaction itself is not there, you don't have to manage it. But that possibility can come into being only when you do not label the psychological reaction. But the thinker, he doesn't feel comfortable with that, because if he doesn't label, he can't do anything about it. and not being able to do anything about it is not an acceptable situation for the thinker, because then he feels insecure. He doesn't know if that sensation arises, what will happen. And therefore, out of that insecurity, he labels.
He was very comfortable with the
Yeah.
known phase.
Yeah, that's
Very comfortable with the known.
The thinker is very comfortable in its own field of the known, his known field. And unknown, he feels insecure because he can't do anything about it. He can't even protect. So I think probably the instinct of self-protection functioning in the psychological field is probably making the self do all these things. Yeah.
Sir, if I can speak for just a minute about Vipashyana. I have attended a couple of retreats, and I think it is only in the very initial stages that we label the sensations. Because in order to understand the instructions, they will tell us that, okay, this is the perspiration sensation, this is the healing sensation, this is the wound sensation, this is pleasant sensation, and you feel some gross sensation. So initially we might have to label in order to understand the instructions. But as we progress through the course, they recommend us not to label the sensations, and if we see the sensation as gross, we just remain with it for a moment, and if it is pleasant, we just go on to next body part something. But labeling is not a recommended thing.
Label also disappears actually, that's the process.
Here they are sensation as a sensation. Just a sensation as a sensation. There is no great deal about it.
No, that's okay. That's fine. That's what we want. We are saying that look at sensation as sensation. Observe sensation as sensation.
And I think, sir, when you have observed the sensation as and labeled it, I don't know, but it might have been transmuted or subsided just because you have observed it. You may have labeled it also, but maybe it might have been because of your observation also. You have developed some.
Yeah, I think it's a time we have to stop. Otherwise, we will end up in discussing Vipashyana. So with this, I take your leave and we hope to meet again soon. If not actually online, at least online.